Hi there. In this lecture we see Mario Bertok against Mikhail Tal in 1961 Bled Tournament, round 6. We see d4, Tal plays knight f6, c4, and now e6, knight f3, and here Tal goes in for a Benoni. So we have c5, d5, e takes, c takes. The Benoni isn't so popular nowadays, but Tal actually made this a really powerful weapon of choice, with the peak year being 1960, actually the year Tal became world chess champion. So he was a kind of champion of this opening. We see g6, knight c3, bishop g7. So not yet playing with the d6 move, so letting white, actually, if white wanted to play d6, but it is a bit controversial. The pawn can be a weakness later. We see white playing the more modest e4, d6 from black now, bishop e2, both sides castle, rook e8, knight d2, knight a6, f3, knight d7, knight c4, so torturing the classic weakness of the Benoni, the d6 pawn. We see knight e5, bishop f4. Now perhaps here an interesting alternative is knight e3. This keeps a kind of positional bind. If knight c7, king h1, for example here, f4 is then possible. And white seems to have a very nice position. Okay, so bishop f4 though was played. And now there is some simplification possible. Knight takes c4, bishop takes c4, knight c7, queen d2, a6. So black is playing for b5 in principle. White puts a clamp on that with a4. We still see a determination for b5 with rook b8. If b6, then, for example, bishop g5, this situation leaves white quite comfortable. For example, here, it could be kind of given to black to decide what to do here. And if, for example, queen d7, g4, what is actually black doing? B takes, knight takes c4, it's kind of nice for white. But here we see rook b8, actually, which kind of invites a5. This is a really interesting plan, and it reminds me actually of a few blitz games I had once with international master Andrew Webster, where we had a kind of discussion across a number of games about a5 in a Benoni structure, and I wasn't entirely sure at the time if a6 should be given as a structural weakness versus the play on the b file. Tal actually does play b5, and it is a kind of top engine choice to either play b5 or b6 to accept the a6 weakness. It doesn't seem that easy to exploit this weakness, so black does get some kind of counterplay. So it's all kind of position sensitive though. So here white indulges in rook a5. This might not be the most accurate move, because sometimes that rook is a kind of target with this queen x-raying the rook. For example, if bishop g5, queen d7, rook a2, let's take this scenario. Knight b5 is interesting, and maybe that's what white was trying to rule out, this kind of knight b5 maneuver, because it blunts that bishop against a6. But if queen d3, f5, and things get kind of interesting here. So yeah, it's a pretty interesting position indeed. If, for example, h3, h6, bishop d2, white should have small edge in theory, but perhaps rook a5 was addressing this knight b5. Instead of bishop g5, rook a2 is also just to show this kind of a6 versus b file pressure. On rook a2, bishop d7, let's have this as an example where white classically builds on a6. You might think this is very, very logical, but bishop b5 can be used, and on knight takes, a takes, this situation isn't so bad at all. The weakness can run away essentially in some cases. So it's not that easy to exploit this a6 pawn. So okay, back to rook a5. We have rook b4 hitting the bishop, and here white goes actually disastrous, absolute disastrous Liren. White plays rook a4. Total disaster. Can you spot why if I give you 5 seconds to pause the video for 50 points? So black to play and basically win. Okay, yeah, check all the forcing moves with high priority. Sometimes in certain situations they are, you know, absolutely winning. And it's the case here. Black, Tal, just plays bishop takes c3. Yeah, white underestimated, didn't seem to factor in this bishop takes c3. In general, you don't want to give up your fianchetto bishop, but if the position demands it, the position demands it. So here, yeah, it's possible to do this. So it's actually winning the rook. If queen takes, rook takes, there's no major backfire here. If bishop h6, black can do all sorts of things, potentially, but it looks as though f6 might be the most sensible, just to blunt against the mate threat, and that's fine. Black's just one material. So yes, a huge blunder there. If b3 instead, black's position turns out to be, you know, potentially okay with knight a8 hitting the rook. So say this doubling again here, it looks as though, well, this would mean, you know, this structure is terrible, but there's knight b6. It's interesting, there are resources here. So trying to hit c4 and b3, there's a structure here to undermine as well. So if bishop takes a6, we're getting a kind of exchange of prisoners, as Nekhemyevich would say, a weakness for a weakness. So yeah, it's an interesting debate, this whole a6. And here, for example, if we carried on, now we're hitting the rook with the queen. So say knight d1, protecting the rook. Bishop d4 check. Bishop takes a6. Queen b8 is even possible here. Even though it looks as though d6 is weak, there are other resources based on that b file, pivoting via the b file. So knight e3 might be necessary, because if bishop d6 takes d6, queen b5 double attacks, a6 and f1. So let's go with, for example, knight e3, knight e5, just in time. It seems as though black does have resources and potentially crushes white on the first rank, as this example shows. For example, here, and then rook b1, and then white's being kind of crushed on that first rank. So, you know, it's a controversial kind of situation. If that is best, then, you know, that's not particularly great position for white to be in. White's just material down, having to solve this back row issue. So white's the exchange down. So anyway, the debate's out, really. It's really an interesting debate to have, this whole a6 versus semi-open b file. So it's actually a debate I kind of had in blitz games, you know, over a number of games against a very, very strong player. And overall I felt I was getting good games. So it's a concern, especially if you're going to play the Benoni. It's a very interesting idea here that's actually been demonstrated, of actually inviting the binding move a5, because that fixes, basically, in effect, the a5 pawn, which means you can then play b6 and get to open up to get a semi-open file. So it's a very interesting, like, piece activity boosting idea, but, you know, sacrificing pawn structure. So piece activity, basically, versus pawn structure is an interesting example where you can accept sometimes a structural defect, but you have to really be aware of the pieces, the configurations, the potential weaknesses, what happens after the pawn is won, the tempo gainers, the weakness of the back row sometimes. A lot of tactical considerations coming in. But we see, yeah, a disastrous move here with rook a4. But anyway, yeah, the Benoni was overall a fantastic point scorer opening for Mikhail Tal. In recent years, though, with engines and everything, you know, lines are being worked out to get definite advantages. There are very aggressive variations, for example, the flick knife variation early on against the Benoni, which, you know, is very, very dangerous. So the popularity has gone down over the years, but it's still an interesting surprise weapon, perhaps, to try out. And this B-file mechanism here, it seems all is not lost just because you have a weak A6 pawn, essentially. So there's a lot of interesting stuff behind the scenes. Okay, thanks so much. Hi there. Thanks for getting to the end of the YouTube video. If you would like to see other Mikhail Tal games, I actually have an amazing course for Mikhail Tal, which is currently at 4.9 with over 400 students. You can check this out from the Kingscrusher TV page. So Chess Strategy and Tactics, Mikhail Tal's amazing games. You can check out some free preview videos as well here. If you do expand all sections, you can see the preview links to get some free previews. So I hope you do check out this course index and the free previews. So I really had a thrilling time actually checking out Mikhail Tal's games. So yeah, the YouTube video here you saw was just a sample from this course. I hope you check it out. Okay, thanks so much. Oh, by the way, comments, questions, likes, shares, all appreciated. And if you did get to this part of the video, please do leave some sort of comment like Tal fan. Okay, thanks again.